Welcome back to Dark Horror Stories. In today's episode, I'm sharing 10 disturbing stories from isolated cabins deep in the wilderness. These are tales of people who sought solitude in remote places and discovered they were never truly alone. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Story 1. My Aunt Diane left me her cabin when she passed in the spring of 2019. I hadn't been up there since I was maybe 12, and even then I only went once. The place sat about 40 miles northwest of Bend, Oregon, tucked into a stretch of pine forest so dense you couldn't see the sky through the canopy. Dee bought it back in the 70s with her husband before he died, and as far as I knew, she hadn't spent a night there in at least 15 years. The lawyer said the property was mine if I wanted it, but I'd need to go up and deal with her things, make sure the structure was sound, that sort of thing. I drove up on a Thursday in late October. The road got worse the deeper I went, asphalt turning to gravel turning to just 2 tire ruts with grass growing between them. I had to stop twice to move fallen branches. My phone lost signal about 20 minutes before I reached the turnoff to her driveway, which wasn't really a driveway so much as a gap between trees that my Subaru barely fit through. The cabin itself looked smaller than I remembered. 1-story dark wood siding, a covered porch with a rocking chair that had moss growing on one armrest. The windows were filmed with years of dust. I'd brought a sleeping bag, some groceries, a lantern. I wasn't sure if the power even worked. When I tried the porch steps, they creaked so loud I hesitated, testing each one before putting my full weight down. The front door was unlocked. Inside smelled like old paper and something else, something faintly sweet that reminded me of fruit left too long in the sun. The main room had a kitchenette along one wall, a wood stove in the corner, a couch with a crocheted blanket draped over the back. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust except the blanket, which looked recently disturbed, like someone had been sitting under it. That should have struck me as strange, but I told myself maybe animals had gotten in, raccoons or something. I spent the first hour opening windows, sweeping the floor, checking the cupboards. Most of the food was long expired, cans bloated and rusted. I found a stack of my aunt's journals on a shelf above the sink, her handwriting looping and small. I didn't read them then, didn't feel right. There was a bedroom off the main room, just big enough for a double bed and a dresser. The closet door was open. I could see her clothes still hanging there, dresses I remembered her wearing to church. The sun set early. By 6, it was nearly dark outside, the trees pressing close enough to the windows that I couldn't see past them. I got the wood stove going, made myself a sandwich, and sat on the couch with one of her journals. The entries were sparse, mostly notes about the weather, about birds she'd seen. Then I found one dated August 1987. She'd written, "Heard it again last night, scratching under the floorboards. James says it's rats, but rats don't scratch in patterns. I counted, 7 scratches. Pause, 7 more, pause, repeat." I closed the journal. My sandwich tasted like sawdust suddenly. I looked at the floor, at the wide pine boards that ran the length of the room. I couldn't hear anything, just the fire crackling in the stove, the wind moving through the trees outside. I tried to read more but couldn't focus. Around 9, I rolled out my sleeping bag on the couch, kept the lantern burning low on the coffee table. I didn't want to sleep in the bedroom, though I couldn't have explained why. I lay there listening to the cabin settle, the wood contracting in the cold. Every sound seemed louder than it should be. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. The lantern had burned down to almost nothing, just a weak glow. The fire in the stove had died to embers. I was sweating despite the cold, my heart already pounding before I fully understood why. Then I heard it, scratching, directly beneath where I was lying, slow, deliberate, 7 distinct scrapes. Pause, 7 more, pause, 7 more. I held my breath, tried to convince myself it was an animal just like I'd thought earlier, but the rhythm was too precise, too measured. I counted 4 cycles before it stopped. The silence afterward was worse than the sound. I sat up slowly, keeping the sleeping bag pulled around me like it could somehow protect me. The floorboards looked the same as before, solid, undisturbed. I thought about my aunt's journal entry about James, who said it was rats. James, who died in 1992. Had she heard this for years? Had she just lived with it? The scratching started again, this time closer to the bedroom. Same pattern. 7 and 7 and 7. I fumbled for my phone, thinking I'd use the flashlight, but of course there was no signal and the battery was at 12%. I turned on the flashlight anyway, swept it across the floor. Nothing, just old pine boards and 30 years of scuff marks. When I pointed the light toward the bedroom door, something moved in the darkness beyond it. I saw it. I absolutely saw it. A pale shape low to the ground, pulling itself back behind the doorframe. The movement was wrong, not like an animal. Like something dragging itself with its arms, elbows bending backward. I was off the couch before I decided to move, grabbing my keys, my jacket. I didn't bother with the sleeping bag or the groceries or any of it. The scratching was coming from multiple places now, under the floor, behind the walls. That same 7-count pattern overlapping until I couldn't tell where one cycle ended and another began. I ran for the front door, wrenched it open. The porch steps groaned under my feet, but I didn't slow down. I could hear something behind me, something that sounded like fingernails on wood, but louder, faster. I got to my car, yanked the door open, started the engine on the first try, thank God. As I reversed down that narrow driveway, my headlights swept across the cabin's front window. There was a face pressed against the glass, pale. No features I could make out, just a smooth oval with darkness where the eyes and mouth should be. And its hands, palms flat against the window on either side of its head. The fingers were too long, they seemed to bend in too many places. I didn't look back after that. Drove those 40 miles doing 60 on roads that weren't meant for it. Nearly put my car in a ditch twice. I called a real estate agent the next morning from my apartment in Eugene. Told them to sell the property as is. I didn't care about the price, I just wanted it gone. They called me back 3 days later. Said they'd sent someone up to assess the place. The cabin was fine, structurally sound, but they'd found something strange. Under the floorboards in the main room there was a crawl space, maybe 3 feet deep, just dirt and cobwebs, they said, but all along the underside of the floor someone had carved marks, hundreds of them, the same pattern over and over. 7 scratches, then 7 more, then 7 more. The agent asked if I knew anything about that. I told them no. Told them to sell it and don't call me again. Last I heard, the cabin's still on the market. No one else made an offer. I don't blame them. Sometimes late at night in my apartment I'll hear scratching, just the building settling, the pipes cooling. That's what I tell myself, but I count anyway. And sometimes I swear it's 7. Story 2. I was supposed to meet my girlfriend Emma at her family's cabin in the Adirondacks for Thanksgiving weekend. This was 2016, maybe early 2017. Her parents had owned the place since before she was born, used it every summer and most holidays. She'd been talking about it for months, how peaceful it was, how much I'd love it. I was driving up from Boston. She was coming from Albany, where she'd been visiting her sister. The plan was I'd get there Thursday afternoon. She'd arrive Friday morning. The cabin was off Route 30, then about 6 miles down a seasonal road that got rough enough I worried about my suspension. GPS stopped working around mile 4. I was using directions Emma had texted me. Past the old barn with no roof, turn left at the boulder that looks like a thumb. Cabin's another 1/4 mile, you'll see the red door. The directions were perfect, but they made me feel like I was heading somewhere that didn't want to be found. When I got there, the sun was already low, everything washed in that orange light that makes the woods look like they're on fire. The cabin was nicer than I'd expected. 2 stories, big windows, a deck that wrapped around 3 sides. I could see a lake through the trees, water flat and dark. Emma had told me where they kept the spare key under a fake rock near the propane tank. I let myself in, turned on the heat, started unpacking the groceries I'd brought. The inside was all knotty pine and log furniture, mounted fish on the walls, a stone fireplace big enough to stand in. Family photos everywhere. Emma as a kid in a life jacket, her parents looking younger than I'd ever seen them. I felt like an intruder touching their things, so I mostly kept to the kitchen, making myself dinner, checking my phone even though I knew there was no signal. I ate on the couch, watching the last of the daylight fade. The woods got dark fast up there, total darkness by 6. I could hear the lake moving, small waves hitting the shore, an owl somewhere close by, normal sounds, peaceful like Emma had said. I built a fire in the fireplace, found a book on the shelf, tried to relax. Around 10, I started getting ready for bed. The upstairs had 3 bedrooms. Emma had told me to use the one at the end of the hall, the one with the good mattress. I brushed my teeth in the bathroom, splashed water on my face. When I looked up into the mirror, I saw something that made my hands freeze on the edge of the sink. There was writing on the mirror, not fogged-up finger writing, but something underneath the glass, on the back of the mirror itself. I could only see it because of the angle of the light from the hallway. It said, "Don't sleep upstairs." I stepped back, looked at it from different angles. It was definitely there, written in something dark, maybe marker. But why would someone write on the back of a mirror? And how long had it been there? The letters were shaky, uneven. I thought maybe it was a joke, something Emma's brother had done years ago to scare her. I almost laughed, but I didn't sleep upstairs. I brought my stuff back down, made a bed on the couch in front of the dying fire. Told myself I was being stupid, but the cabin felt different now. Too quiet. I lay there listening, and the more I listened, the more I realized the quiet wasn't complete. There was something else. A soft, rhythmic sound, like breathing, but not quite. Like air moving through a gap in a wall. It was coming from upstairs. I tried to ignore it, pulled the blanket over my head like a kid, but the sound didn't stop. It got louder, and then I heard footsteps. Slow, heavy steps moving across the floor of the bedroom Emma had told me to use. Back and forth, back and forth. Each pass took exactly the same amount of time, like someone pacing precisely. I sat up. The fire had burned down to nothing. The room was almost completely dark. I thought about going up there, confronting whoever was in the cabin, but I knew the door had been locked, knew the windows were all secure because I'd checked them before dinner. And somehow I knew, absolutely knew, that if I went upstairs, I'd find the bedroom empty. The pacing stopped. The breathing sound stopped. For maybe 30 seconds, there was perfect silence. Then something else started. A dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the floor toward the stairs. I could hear it reach the hallway. Could hear it start down the steps. Whatever it was coming toward me. I grabbed my keys and phone and ran for the front door. Didn't look back, didn't look at the stairs. I heard something behind me, something that sounded like wet fabric dragging on wood, but I was already outside, already at my car. I locked myself in, started the engine. My headlights caught the cabin's windows, and I saw someone standing in the upstairs bedroom looking down at me. But the figure was wrong. It was too tall for the ceiling, bent at an angle that made my eyes hurt. I drove back to that main road doing 40 on gravel, nearly lost control twice. Found a motel with Wi-Fi and called Emma at 2 in the morning. Told her there was someone in the cabin, she needed to call the police. She was silent for a long time. Then she said, "You went upstairs, didn't you?" I told her no, told her about the mirror. She started crying. Said her brother had died in that cabin 7 years ago, overdose in the upstairs bedroom. They'd found him 3 days after. She'd written on the mirror herself, the day of his funeral, written it on the back so her parents wouldn't see. She'd forgotten it was still there. Said she should have warned me, should have told me to stay somewhere else. I asked what she meant. She said the first night after her brother died, her father stayed at the cabin alone to pack up his things. He left before dawn, drove straight through to Albany, wouldn't talk about what happened, but he told Emma's mother one thing: never sleep upstairs. I didn't go back to the cabin. Emma met me at the motel the next day. We spent Thanksgiving at a diner off the highway. She sold the cabin the following spring. Said the realtor told her the inspection turned up something strange. Someone had gouged marks into the hallway floor between the stairs and the master bedroom. Long, parallel scratches, like something with multiple limbs had been dragging itself back and forth, over and over, wearing grooves into the wood. Story 3. The summer I turned 32, I took a job as a fire lookout in the Bitterroot Mountains of Montana. I'd been working tech in Seattle for 8 years and I was burned out, needed to get away from screens and traffic and people. The Forest Service placement was for 3 months, June through August, in a tower 12 miles from the nearest road. They'd helicopter in supplies every 2 weeks. Total isolation. It sounded perfect. The tower sat on a ridge at about 7,000 feet. Single room, maybe 12 by 12, windows on all sides, a catwalk that ran around the perimeter. I had a cot, a propane stove, a radio for reporting fires, and a detailed map table for triangulating smoke. The ranger who trained me spent 2 days going over procedures, showing me how to use the Osborne fire finder, warning me about lightning storms. He was a guy named Harold, maybe 60, who'd been doing this for decades. Right before he left, he'd pointed to a cabin about half a mile down the ridge, barely visible through the trees. "That's the old lookout station," he said. "Built in the 40s, abandoned in the 80s. Don't go down there." I asked why. He shrugged. "It's unstable. Floors rotted through in places. Last guy who poked around down there fell through up to his hip, had to radio for help." Made sense. I told him I'd stay clear of it. He nodded, and then he said something I didn't understand at the time. He said, "If you hear someone calling your name at night, don't answer, and don't look for who's calling." I laughed, thought he was messing with me. But he didn't laugh back, just said, "I'm serious, don't answer." Then he left and I was alone. The first week was exactly what I needed. I'd wake up with the sunrise, scan the horizon for smoke, read books, cook simple meals. The silence was incredible. Not total silence, there were birds and wind and the tower creaking when gusts hit it, but human silence. No voices, no engines, just me and 100 miles of wilderness. I started hearing the calling on day 9. It was past midnight. I'd been asleep for maybe 2 hours. Something woke me up and at first I thought it was an animal. Then I heard it clearly. A woman's voice coming from somewhere down the ridge calling my name. "Marcus, Marcus." Just like that, calm and patient, like she was trying to get my attention but didn't want to shout. I sat up in my cot, looked out the windows but couldn't see anything, just darkness and the vague shapes of trees. The voice called again. "Marcus, come down here, Marcus." It was coming from the direction of the old cabin. I remembered what Harold had said, but it was hard to just lie there. The voice sounded so real, so human. I thought maybe a hiker was lost, needed help. But there weren't any trails up here. No one should be anywhere near this ridge. I stayed in my cot, didn't answer. The calling continued for maybe 10 minutes, then stopped. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. It happened again the next night. Same time, same voice. "Marcus, I need you to come down here." The tone was more urgent this time, almost pleading. I put my pillow over my head, but I could still hear it. Started wondering if I was losing my mind already, if isolation did this to people. During the day, I tried to spot the old cabin through binoculars. I could just make out part of the roof, some collapsed walls. It looked completely deserted. Definitely didn't look safe to explore, but I kept thinking about that voice, how it knew my name, how specific it was. The third night I decided to record it. I had my phone with me even though there was no service up here. I figured if I caught the voice on audio, I could prove to myself it was real, that I wasn't hallucinating. When midnight came and the calling started, I held the phone up to the window, hit record. "Marcus." "Please come down, I need you." I recorded about a minute of it before the voice stopped. Then I played it back. The playback made me drop the phone because the voice on the recording wasn't a woman's voice. It was my voice. Exactly my voice, calling my own name, begging myself to come down to the cabin. I didn't sleep that night either, or the next night. I kept the lights on in the tower, kept the radio on for company even though it was just static. The calling came every night after that, always at midnight, always the same. Sometimes it sounded like my voice, sometimes like my mother's voice. Once it sounded like my ex-girlfriend Priya, who I hadn't spoken to in 3 years. By day 15, I was barely functional. I'd stopped scanning for fires properly, stopped cooking real meals. I just sat at the map table, staring down at the old cabin, trying to understand what was happening. The helicopter brought supplies that afternoon. Different ranger this time, a younger woman named Rita. She took one look at me and asked if I was okay. I told her I was fine, didn't mention the voices, didn't want her to think I was crazy, but after she unloaded the supplies, she said, "Harold wanted me to check something. Have you been down to the old cabin?" I said no. She nodded. "Good, keep it that way." She started to leave, then turned back. "Did he tell you about the last lookout who stayed up here?" I said he hadn't. She looked uncomfortable. Guy named Thomas did a full season in 2009. When they came to get him at the end of August, he was gone. They found the tower locked from the inside, his gear still here, but no Thomas. They searched for 2 weeks. Eventually found him down at the old cabin. He'd fallen through the floor like Harold said, but here's the thing. He'd been dead for maybe a day. Exposure. They couldn't figure out why he'd gone down there. He knew it wasn't safe. She looked at me like she wanted to say more but didn't, just told me to stay safe and left. That night the calling started earlier, 10 p.m. instead of midnight, and it wasn't just one voice anymore. It was multiple voices overlapping, all of them mine, all of them calling my name, asking me to come down, begging me to come down. The sound filled the tower, seemed to come from every direction at once. I grabbed the radio, tried to call for help, but all I got was static. I tried my phone. Dead battery even though I'd charged it that morning. The voices got louder. I could hear them on the catwalk now, circling the tower, could hear footsteps on the metal grating. But when I looked out the windows, I couldn't see anyone. Then I saw movement at the old cabin, lights in the windows, not flashlights, softer than that, like candlelight or lanterns, and figures moving between the trees, heading up the ridge toward my tower. I counted 4 of them. They moved wrong, too fluid, like they were gliding instead of walking. I don't remember making the decision to leave. I just remember climbing down the tower ladder at 2 in the morning, running down the trail with my flashlight, not caring about the drop-offs or the loose rocks. I ran for 3 hours straight until my lungs were burning and my legs were shaking. Found the main trail at dawn, followed it to the ranger station. They had to send someone up to get my gear. I didn't finish the season. Told them I had a family emergency. They didn't push it. When I got back to Seattle, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd left something unfinished, that whatever was in that cabin was still waiting, still calling. 6 months later, I got an email from the Forest Service. They were doing a controlled demolition of the old lookout cabin. Unstable structure, safety hazard. The email included a photo taken before the demolition. Just a standard documentation shot. But if you looked closely at one of the cabin windows, you could see something. A pale blur that might have been a reflection or a trick of the light, but it looked like a face pressed against the glass from inside. And the expression, if you could call it that, looked patient, like it was willing to wait. Story 4. My grandfather left me his hunting cabin in northern Wisconsin when he passed away in the fall of 2018. He'd built it himself in the 60s, back when you could still claim land out there if you worked it. It sat on 40 acres of mixed hardwood and pine, right up against the border of the Chequamegon National Forest. I'd only been there twice as a kid, both times in summer. I remembered it being rustic but solid, one big room with a sleeping loft. a hand pump well outside. I drove up from Milwaukee in early November, thinking I'd winterize it and maybe sell come spring. The leaves were all down by then, the woods bare and gray. I had my dog with me, a shepherd mix named Kayla who'd been my grandfather's before she was mine. She usually loved car rides, but she got weird about 20 miles from the cabin, started whining and pacing in the back seat. I'd never seen her act like that. The driveway was overgrown, barely passable. I had to get out twice to move deadfall. When the cabin came into view, I was surprised by how small it looked, how dark the windows were. The door was locked, but I had the key on the same ring as my grandfather's house key. The lock stuck. Took me a solid minute of jiggling to get it open. Inside smelled like mice and old smoke. There was a thick layer of dust on everything, the kind that puffs up when you walk. The furniture was exactly how I remembered it. A plaid couch facing the wood stove, a table with two mismatched chairs, shelves lined with ancient paperbacks, and coffee cans full of nails and screws. But something felt off. Not visibly wrong, just a feeling in the air like the cabin had been holding its breath. Kayla wouldn't come inside. She sat on the porch and barked, not her normal bark. This was higher pitched, almost frantic. I tried coaxing her in, but she backed away every time I reached for her collar. Finally, I gave up, left her outside with her water bowl, and started assessing what needed to be done. The wood stove was full of old ash. I cleaned it out, got a fire going with newspaper and kindling I found in a bin by the door. The chimney drew fine. As the cabin warmed up, the smell changed, still musty, but underneath that was something else, something organic, something rot. I traced it to the sleeping loft. The ladder up there was sturdy enough. At the top I found the source. Something had died up there, small animal, maybe a squirrel or a chipmunk that had gotten in and couldn't get out. It was in the corner, mostly decomposed. I wrapped it in a trash bag, brought it down and put it outside to deal with later. When I came back in, Kayla was inside, standing in the middle of the room, staring up at the loft with her hackles raised. I spent the afternoon doing inventory. The propane tank outside was empty. The hand pump worked, but the water came up rust-colored at first. The roof looked okay from the outside. I made a list of what I'd need to bring next trip. As the sun set, I realized I'd forgotten to pack a sleeping bag. I'd have to use the old blankets from the loft. I climbed back up as it got dark outside. There were 2 wool blankets in a cedar chest, mothballed but clean enough. When I opened the chest, I found something else. A journal, spiral-bound, pages yellowed. I opened it, my grandfather's handwriting. The first entry was dated October 1987. The knocking started again last night. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more. Always from the north wall. Checked outside this morning. No tracks, no marks on the wood. Going to ignore it this year. Maybe it will stop. I flipped forward. November 1988. It's not knocking anymore. It's scratching. Long, slow scrapes. Always at 3 a.m. Always the north wall. December 1991. Saw it tonight. Thought it was a deer at first, standing at the edge of the tree line, but it was too tall and it didn't move right. When I shone the flashlight on it, it turned and walked back into the woods. Walked on 2 legs but bent wrong. Not coming back here after dark anymore. March 1995. I think it gets in somehow when I'm not here. Things are moved. The chairs face the wrong direction. The stove is warm even though I haven't used it in months. I don't know what to do. This is my land. I built this place, but I don't think I'm alone here. The last entry was from June 2003. Just 1 line. It spoke to me last night. I closed the journal, looked at Kayla. She was still staring at the north wall, the one that backed up against the densest part of the woods. I told myself my grandfather had been old, maybe confused. These entries were probably just, I don't know, stories he was working on, fiction, but I couldn't make myself believe that. I didn't want to sleep in the loft, didn't want to be up there in the dark. I made a bed on the couch with the blankets, kept the fire going, kept the lantern lit. Kayla lay on the floor next to me, tense. Around midnight, she started growling. Low and continuous. I sat up. "What is it, girl?" She was staring at the north wall again. And then I heard it. 3 knocks, deliberate, evenly spaced. Pause, 3 more knocks. They weren't coming from outside the wall. They were coming from inside it, from the space between the logs. I grabbed the lantern, held it up. The wall looked solid. No gaps I could see. The knocking stopped. Kayla stopped growling. For maybe 30 seconds, everything was silent. Then the scratching started. Long, slow scrapes, just like my grandfather had written. I could see the wall itself vibrating slightly with each scrape, dust falling from the chinking between the logs. I should have left right then, but I was frozen. The scratching moved along the wall, from one end to the other, then back, and then it stopped. Something else happened instead. The logs themselves began to bulge outward, like something on the other side was pushing against them. I could see the wood flexing, the chinking cracking and falling away in chunks. Kayla was barking now, backing toward the door. I followed her, not taking my eyes off the wall. As I reached the door, one of the logs splintered. A crack ran its length and something pale pushed through the gap. It looked like a finger at first, long and thin and very white. But as more of it came through, I realized it wasn't a finger. It was too long. It kept coming and coming, maybe 2 feet of this pale, segmented thing pushing into the room, bending at angles that didn't make sense. I got the door open. Kayla bolted. I ran after her, leaving the lantern, leaving everything. We ran down that overgrown driveway in pitch darkness, Kayla in the lead. I fell twice, scraped my hands on gravel, didn't stop. Got to my car, fumbled with the keys. Kayla jumped in the moment I opened the door. As I started the engine, I looked back at the cabin. Every window was lit up bright, even though I'd only had 1 lantern. And in each window I could see something moving. Shapes that were too tall for the ceiling, too thin to be human, and they were all pressing against the glass like they were trying to see out or trying to get out. I drove straight through to Milwaukee. 6 hours, didn't stop once. Called a real estate agent the next morning and told them to sell the property. They asked if I wanted to list the cabin as habitable or as a teardown. I told them to burn it, just burn the whole thing and sell the land. They thought I was joking, but I was, and I wasn't going back to find out what was living in those walls. 3 months later, the agent called, said a surveyor had gone out to assess the property. He'd noticed something strange. The north wall of the cabin, the one that faced the woods, had been completely rebuilt recently. Different logs, different chinking, like someone had replaced the entire wall. But my grandfather had been dead for 4 months by then, and I sure as hell hadn't done it. The agent asked if I knew anything about that. I told them no and hung up. The cabin's still for sale. I hope it stays that way. I hope no one ever spends a night there, because I think whatever was trying to get through that wall eventually did, and I don't think it ever left. Story 5. In February of 2020, right before everything shut down, my friend Nadia and I rented a cabin in the Catskills for a long weekend. We both lived in New York City, worked in publishing, and hadn't seen each other much in the previous year. The cabin was listed on one of those rental sites, described as secluded retreat, perfect for writers. It looked nice in the photos. Big stone fireplace, exposed beams, a deck with a view of the mountains. The price seemed too good, honestly, but we figured maybe it was the off-season discount. We drove up on a Friday afternoon, snow starting to fall as we got off the highway. The directions took us down progressively smaller roads until we were on what was barely more than a logging trail, our rental car scraping its undercarriage on frozen ruts. Nadia kept asking if I was sure we had the right place. I wasn't sure, but we didn't have service to check. The cabin appeared suddenly around a bend. It looked like the photos, but also somehow not. Bigger maybe, or darker. The windows reflected the gray sky like mirrors. We parked and unloaded our bags, groceries, the 2 bottles of wine we'd brought. The key was supposed to be in a lockbox by the door. It took me a few tries to get the combination right, fingers numb from the cold. Inside was exactly what you'd expect. Cozy, well-furnished. The kind of place designed to look authentically rustic while having all modern conveniences. There was a welcome basket on the kitchen counter with local honey and artisanal crackers. A note from the owner, someone named Patricia. "Enjoy your stay. Please note, the basement door must remain locked at all times. This is for insurance purposes. Thank you." Nadia read the note over my shoulder. "Weird," she said. "What's in the basement?" I shrugged. "Probably just their storage. Liability thing." We spent the first evening the way we'd planned. Made dinner, drank wine, caught up on the last year of our lives. The cabin was warm and quiet. Snow had started falling harder, big wet flakes that stuck to the windows. Around 10, we noticed the lights flickering, not dramatically, just little dips in brightness. Nadia said old houses did that. I agreed. We built up the fire and kept talking. I woke up on the couch around 2 a.m. Nadia had gone to bed already. The fire had burned down to embers. I was about to head to my room when I heard something, a voice, singing, very faint, like it was coming from far away or through thick walls. I couldn't make out words, but the melody was clear. Slow and repetitive, a lullaby maybe. I stood up trying to locate the source. It seemed to be coming from the floor. I remembered the basement, the note. I found the basement door in the kitchen behind a folding screen. There was a padlock on it, an actual padlock, which seemed excessive for insurance purposes. The singing was definitely coming from down there. A woman's voice, but not a recording. There was too much variation, too much breath between phrases. I should have woken Nadia, should have done a lot of things. Instead, I looked for the key to the padlock. Found it hanging on a hook inside one of the kitchen cabinets, labeled basement do not use. The prohibition made me want to use it more. I told myself I was just going to look, just see what was down there, prove to myself it was nothing. The lock opened easily. The door swung inward. Steep wooden stairs leading down into darkness. The singing stopped the moment I opened the door. Total silence. I flicked the light switch at the top of the stairs. Nothing happened. Of course, I used my phone flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating rough stone walls, earthen floor. I took one step down, then another. The air got colder with each step. Smelled damp mineral. I could see the bottom of the stairs, see the basement stretching back into shadow. There was something down there. Shapes I couldn't quite resolve. Furniture maybe, or equipment. I was halfway down when I heard the breathing, not the singing, just breathing, heavy and wet like someone with fluid in their lungs. It was coming from the far corner, the part my flashlight couldn't reach. I froze, the breathing continued, in and out, and then something moved in that corner. Something that had been so still I'd mistaken it for a shadow. It stood up, or unfolded. I can't describe it better than that. It had been compressed somehow, and now it was extending, rising to its full height, which was impossible because the ceiling down there couldn't have been more than 6 feet, and this thing was taller, much taller. I could see its outline against the lesser darkness of the basement, a narrow shape, elongated. The head brushed the ceiling joists and kept going, bending at an angle that made me feel sick. I backed up the stairs. The thing took a step forward. Its movement was all wrong. The legs bent backward at the knee, the arms hung too low, and the face, God, the face. My flashlight swept across it for just a second, but that was enough. It was pale and smooth like uncooked dough. The eyes were holes, deep holes that seemed to go back farther than a skull should allow. I was at the top of the stairs. I slammed the door shut, fumbled with the padlock, couldn't get it through the hasp. My hands were shaking too badly. I heard the thing on the stairs, heard its feet on the wooden steps. A slow, deliberate climb. I finally got the lock on, snapped it closed. The door bulged outward. Something hit it from the other side with enough force to crack the wood. Hit it again. The whole frame was shaking. I ran to Nadia's room, burst through the door, pulled her out of bed. She was groggy, confused. I dragged her to the front door, grabbed our coats, didn't bother with anything else. Outside, the snow had stopped. Our car was covered in about 4 inches. I started it, turned the heat on full blast, started clearing the windshield with my hands because I couldn't find the scraper. Nadia was asking what was happening. I couldn't form words yet, just pointed at the cabin. Every light inside was on now, and every window had something pressed against it. The same pale, smooth face, the same dark holes for eyes, but they couldn't all be the same thing. There were too many windows, too many faces, unless there were more of them, unless the basement was full of them. We drove out of there doing 30 on ice, sliding through turns, not caring, found a main road, found a town, found a diner that was open 24 hours. I called the rental company from the diner parking lot, told them there was something wrong with the cabin. They needed to send someone to check on it. The person on the phone said they'd make a note. They didn't sound concerned. 2 weeks later, after we were both back in the city, after the pandemic had started and everything was shutting down, I got an email from the rental company. It said the cabin was being temporarily delisted due to maintenance issues. No refund offered, but they included a credit toward a future stay, as if I would ever go back. I looked up the property later when I couldn't sleep and was spiraling into internet rabbit holes. Found an old newspaper article from 1987. A family had owned the property then. A couple and their 3 kids. One winter they'd all disappeared. The cabin was found locked from the inside, the fire still burning, food on the table, no sign of the family. Search teams looked for weeks, never found anything, but the article mentioned one detail that made my stomach drop. During the search, they'd opened the basement for the first time in years, found it completely empty, just dirt floor and stone walls. But carved into the dirt, someone had scratched a message, over and over, covering every available surface. There in the walls, there in the walls, there in the walls. The article said investigators couldn't determine what it meant, but I think I know. I think those things don't just live in basements. I think they live in the spaces between floors, behind walls, under foundations. And I think that family found out the same way we almost did. The difference is we got out. I don't think they did. Story 6. My Uncle Raymond died in March of 2021, and in his will he left me a cabin he'd owned in the Ozarks. I barely knew the guy. He was my mother's brother, lived alone most of his life, worked as an electrician. We'd maybe seen him 5 times growing up, so it was strange that he'd left me anything, let alone property. The lawyer explained that I was his only living relative. My mother had passed when I was 23 and Raymond had no kids. The cabin was in Arkansas, about 30 miles from the nearest town, down a series of dirt roads that Google Maps couldn't properly track. I drove down from St. Louis in April with my girlfriend Zoe. We'd been talking about moving somewhere quieter, getting out of the city. Maybe this was a sign. We could fix the place up, sell our apartment, start over. It was raining when we arrived. Not a heavy rain, just a steady mist that made everything look gray and soft. The cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by oak trees, single-story metal roof, paint peeling. There was a covered porch with a swing that looked like it would collapse if you sat on it. The windows were dark. Zoe said, "Are you sure your uncle actually lived here?" I wasn't sure. It didn't look lived in. It looked abandoned. But the lawyer had given me a key, and when I tried it in the front door, it turned smoothly. Inside smelled stale but not musty, not like a place that had been empty for months, more like someone had just left a few days ago. The layout was simple: living room with a wood stove, kitchen with ancient appliances. 2 bedrooms off a narrow hallway. Everything was spare, functional. No decorations, no photos, no personality at all. It felt less like a home and more like a place someone stayed when they had nowhere else to go. We spent the afternoon exploring, checking for structural damage, making lists. The cabin was in better shape than it looked. Roof was sound. Plumbing worked, the electricity was off, but the breaker box looked okay. Zoe found a stack of mail on the kitchen counter, bills and junk addressed to Raymond, postmarked right up until February, so he had been living here. In one of the bedrooms, I found a notebook in the nightstand drawer. I almost didn't open it, felt like I was invading privacy, but Raymond was dead and this was technically my property now. The notebook was filled with dates and times, just that, no other context. January 3, 2:17 a.m. January 7, 3:45 a.m. January 15, 2:33 a.m. Pages and pages of entries going back years. Zoe looked over my shoulder. "What do you think that is?" I didn't know, some kind of log maybe. Was he tracking insomnia? But why record it so meticulously? We decided to stay the night, test out the place. We'd brought sleeping bags and a camp stove, made a simple dinner, sat on the porch and listened to the rain. It was peaceful in a way the city never was. No sirens, no voices, just water hitting leaves. Around midnight we turned in. I took the bedroom where I'd found the notebook. Zoe took the other one. I lay in my sleeping bag on top of the bare mattress, staring at the ceiling. The rain had stopped. Everything was quiet, too quiet. I started to notice that absence of sound more than I'd noticed any sound before. It was like the cabin was holding its breath. I don't know what woke me up. One moment I was asleep, the next I was completely alert, heart already racing. The room was dark. The clock on the nightstand read 2:17 a.m. I lay there listening. Nothing. Then I heard it, a single thump from somewhere else in the cabin, not loud, but distinct, like someone had dropped something heavy. I waited. Another thump, this one from the living room maybe. I thought about waking Zoe, but I didn't want to scare her. I got up, grabbed my phone for the flashlight, opened the bedroom door slowly. The hallway was empty. I walked toward the living room, the floorboards creaking under my feet. The living room looked the same as we'd left it, nothing out of place, but something felt different. The air was colder, I could see my breath. I swept my phone light around the room and it caught on something. The wood stove door was open, we'd left it closed. I walked over to it, looked inside. Something was in there, not ash or wood, something else. I reached in without thinking, my hand closing around cold metal. I pulled it out. A flashlight, old, heavy, the kind that takes D batteries. It was turned off. I had no idea why it would be in the stove, but as I held it, I noticed something. The lens was warm, not hot, but warm, like it had been on recently. A sound behind me made me spin around. Zoe was standing in the hallway, her face pale. "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" "Someone walking on the roof." I hadn't heard that, but now that she said it, I could hear something. Footsteps, slow and heavy. Moving from one end of the cabin to the other, we both looked up at the ceiling. The sound passed directly over us, reached the far wall, stopped. For maybe 30 seconds nothing happened. Then the knocking started. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the roof directly above the living room. Pause, 3 more knocks. Pause, 3 more. Zoe grabbed my arm. "We need to leave." I agreed. We went back to the bedrooms, grabbed our stuff, didn't bother rolling up the sleeping bags. We were at the front door when we heard something else. A voice, muffled but clear, coming from outside. "Raymond, Raymond, let me in." I froze. It was a man's voice. Calm, patient. "Raymond, it's cold out here, let me in." Zoe whispered, "Your uncle's dead." I know, I fucking know, but someone was out there. Someone who didn't know Raymond was gone, or someone who did know and was using his name to get us to open the door. The voice continued, "Raymond, I can hear you in there. Open the door." I looked through the window next to the door. The porch was empty. I could see the clearing beyond, the trees at the edge, no one there. But the voice was right outside, close enough that I could hear the speakers breathing between words. "Raymond, we had an agreement, you owe me." Zoe pulled me away from the door. We went out the back, through the kitchen, onto a small concrete patio. The rain had started again. We ran for the car parked around the side of the cabin. As we ran, I saw something that made me stumble. There were footprints in the mud around the cabin, fresh ones, bare footprints, but they weren't human. The toes were too long, and there were too many of them, 6 toes on each foot. We got in the car. I started it. The headlights swept across the cabin as I turned around. There was someone standing on the porch now, tall, thin, wearing what looked like my uncle's clothes, but they didn't fit right. The arms were too long, and the head was wrong. It was tilted at an angle that would break a normal person's neck. The figure raised one hand, waved, a slow, deliberate wave. We left, drove through the night back to St. Louis. I called the lawyer the next day, told him I was refusing the inheritance. He said I couldn't do that, the property was already in my name. I told him to sell it then, do whatever, I didn't care. A week later he called back, said he'd contacted a local real estate agent. The agent had gone out to assess the property. Cabin was locked tight. Everything inside seemed normal, but they'd found something unusual. In that notebook I looked at, the one with all the dates and times, someone had added a new entry. The handwriting was different from the other entries, shaky, uncertain. The entry was dated the night Zoe and I had been there. April 23, 2021, 2:17 a.m., and next to the date someone had written, "New arrangement made." I don't know what that means. I don't want to know. The cabin sold last month. I hope whoever bought it never looks in that notebook. And I hope they never wake up at 2:17 a.m. to the sound of footsteps on the roof. Story 7. When I was 28, I worked for a wildlife research nonprofit doing camera trap surveys in the Cascade Range. We were tracking cougar populations, trying to understand their movement patterns and territory ranges. It was mostly solo work, hiking into remote areas to place motion-activated cameras, checking them every few weeks, collecting the SD cards. I'd done it for 2 seasons without incident. The cabin I used as a base that summer was technically a Forest Service patrol cabin, but no one had used it in years. It was about 15 miles from the nearest trailhead, accessible only on foot. 1 room, a bunk bed, a small stove, a table, solar panel on the roof for basic power. I'd stay there for 2 weeks at a time, hiking out to place cameras, then hike back to civilization to process the data. This was in late July 2013. I just started my second 2-week stint. The hike in had been hot and dusty, the kind of heat that made your pack straps cut into your shoulders. I reached the cabin around dusk, unlocked it with the key the Forest Service had given me. Everything was how I'd left it 2 weeks ago, except for the smell. It wasn't a strong smell, just a faint wrongness in the air like meat that's starting to turn. I checked the little propane fridge, thinking maybe I'd left something in there. Empty. I checked under the bunk, in the cabinets, even up in the rafters. Couldn't find a source. I figured something had died in the walls, a mouse or a mark. Not much I could do about it. I spent the next 3 days setting cameras in my assigned grid. The work was methodical. Hike to location, find a good sight line near a game trail or creek crossing, mount the camera to a tree, test it, mark the coordinates. I'd get back to the cabin around 6 each evening, exhausted. Make dinner, update my field notes, sleep hard. On the 4th night, I found something that changed everything. I'd been checking the 1 camera I'd placed the previous season, the one farthest from the cabin. When I pulled the SD card and previewed the images on my camera's screen, most were what I expected. Deer, a black bear, a few empty frames triggered by windblown branches, but then there was a sequence from 3 nights ago around 2 a.m. The first image showed a person walking past the camera. They were bent forward like they were following a scent trail. The angle was wrong for me to see their face, just the top of their head, their shoulders, their arms hanging down. The next image, taken 3 seconds later, showed them turned toward the camera, but I couldn't see their face, not because of the angle, because there was something wrong with the image. Where their face should be was just a smeared blur, like when someone moves during a long exposure. But this was an instant shot. Motion blur shouldn't exist. The third image showed them gone, just empty forest. I told myself it was another researcher, someone else doing trail work, except we were the only group with permits for this area. And that camera was over 8 miles from the cabin, way off any maintained trail. Who would be out there in the middle of the night? I hiked back to the cabin faster than I should have, not being careful about where I stepped. Got back just before dark. The door was open. I'd locked it that morning. I was sure I'd locked it. I stood outside for a solid minute listening. Heard nothing, went inside with my bear spray in hand. Everything looked normal, nothing taken, nothing moved, but the smell was stronger. I traced it to the bunk bed. To the top bunk specifically, the one I didn't use. I climbed up. The mattress was stained, not old stains, fresh ones, dark and wet. I touched one with my finger, came away red. Blood, a lot of blood. I climbed down, left the cabin, sat outside until my hands stopped shaking. I thought about hiking out, abandoning the rest of my survey, but it was getting dark and I'd never make it to the trailhead before nightfall. The trails here weren't safe at night, too many washouts and steep drop-offs. I'd have to wait until morning. I went back inside as the last light faded, didn't use the top bunk, didn't even want to be in there, but I had no choice. I wedged the door shut with a chair, laid down on the bottom bunk with my headlamp on, my bear spray next to my pillow. Tried to convince myself there was a rational explanation. Maybe someone had been injured, had broken in to rest, had left before I returned. But that didn't explain the camera image, the blurred face. I didn't sleep, just lay there listening. Around midnight I heard something outside, footsteps. Slow and irregular, like someone with a bad limp. They circled the cabin. I counted 4 complete circuits. Then they stopped. Right outside the door, I heard breathing, heavy, wet. The same quality as the meat smell. The door handle started to turn. I'd wedged it with the chair, but the chair was just wood. If someone really wanted in, they'd get in. The handle turned all the way. The door pushed inward an inch, 2 inches. The chair scraped across the floor. I aimed my bear spray at the gap. "I'm armed," I said. My voice sounded thin. "I will spray you." The door stopped moving. For maybe 10 seconds nothing happened. Then a voice came through the gap. My voice, exactly my voice, speaking my own words back to me. "I'm armed, I will spray you." The inflection was perfect. The tone, everything. The door pulled shut. The footsteps resumed, moved away from the cabin, faded into the distance. I left at first light, didn't pack properly, just grabbed my essentials and ran. I made it to the trailhead in under 4 hours, a hike that should take 6. Went straight to the ranger station. Told them someone had broken into the cabin, that I'd found blood. They said they'd send someone to investigate. 2 days later they called me. Said they'd checked the cabin, found the blood on the mattress, ran tests. It wasn't human blood, it was cougar blood, a lot of it, but there was no body, no signs of how it had gotten there, no signs of a struggle, just blood. They asked if I'd seen a cougar near the cabin. I said no, didn't mention the camera image, didn't mention the voice. I knew how that would sound. I quit the job a week later. Told them I'd gotten another offer. They didn't push. I think they could tell something had happened out there, even if I wouldn't say what. I still have that SD card. I've looked at those 3 images probably 100 times, and I've noticed something I didn't see on the camera's small screen. In the second image, the one where the figure is facing the camera, where their face is just a blur, if you zoom in and adjust the contrast, you can see something behind them. Back in the trees, another figure. This one not blurred at all. This one clear and sharp, tall and thin, arms too long, head tilted wrong. And it's looking directly at the camera, looking at me, looking at it. I haven't been back to the Cascades, don't plan to, but sometimes late at night I hear footsteps outside my apartment, slow and irregular. And sometimes I hear my own voice calling my name from the hallway. I don't answer, and I don't open the door. Story 8. I inherited a cabin from my grandmother in the summer of 2014. She passed that spring at 93, still sharp until the very end. The cabin was in Maine, way up near the Canadian border on a lake with a name I can never remember how to pronounce. She'd gone there every August for as long as I'd been alive, always alone, always for exactly 2 weeks. I'd asked to come with her a few times as a kid. She'd always said no. Said it was her place for thinking, for remembering. After the funeral, my mother told me the cabin was mine now. Said Grandma had been very specific about that in her will. It had to go to me, not my mother, not my brother. Me, I was her oldest grandchild. She said I'd understand why when I got there. I drove up in late June before the summer tourists arrived. The lake was still cold, the black flies still swarming. The cabin was at the end of a long dirt road, the last property before the road turned into forest. I could see the lake through the trees, water dark and flat as slate. The cabin was smaller than I'd imagined. 1-story, green paint, a screen porch facing the water. The key was where my mother said it would be, under a specific rock by the steps. Inside smelled like pine and old fabric. There was a main room with a kitchenette, a bedroom barely big enough for the double bed, a bathroom with a composting toilet. Very rustic, very grandma. But there was something else too. A feeling I can't quite describe. Like I was expected, like the cabin had been waiting. On the kitchen table was an envelope with my name on it in Grandma's handwriting. I opened it. Inside was a letter, 2 pages in her careful script. "Dear Lily," it started. "If you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're standing in my cabin wondering why I left it to you. The answer is simple. You're the first woman in our family in 3 generations who might be able to end this. In 1937, my grandmother, your great-great-grandmother, came to this lake. She was running from a bad marriage, needed somewhere to hide. She found this property, bought it cheap because no one else wanted it. The man who sold it to her said the previous owner had disappeared, just walked into the woods one day and never came back. My grandmother didn't care. She built this cabin with her own hands. She lived here alone for 2 months, then something started visiting her at night. She described it in her diary as the thin man. She said he would stand at the tree line after dark, just watching, never came closer, never made a sound, but she could feel him watching, could feel his attention like a physical weight. After 2 months she couldn't take it anymore, she left. But when she got home, back to her husband, she found she was pregnant, which was impossible. She hadn't been with anyone at the cabin, hadn't been with her husband in over a year, but she was pregnant nonetheless. She gave birth to my mother in 1938, and my mother gave birth to me in 1957, and I gave birth to your mother in 1979. 4 generations of women in our family, all of us born from that encounter, whatever it was. Your mother was never interested in understanding this. She wanted to pretend it wasn't real. But you're different, Lily. You always asked questions. You always wanted to know the why of things. So I'm leaving you the cabin. And I'm leaving you the choice. The thin man is still there. I've seen him every year I've visited. He never comes closer, never speaks, but he watches. And I think he's waiting for one of us to finally acknowledge him, to accept him. I was too afraid. Maybe you won't be. The diary is in the locked box under the bed. The key is taped to the underside of the kitchen sink. Whatever you decide, know that I love you, Grandma. I read the letter 3 times. Set it down, looked out the window at the lake, at the trees beyond. The rational part of my brain said this was nonsense. Grandma had been old, maybe confused, maybe the letter was some kind of metaphor I wasn't understanding, but my hands were shaking, and I couldn't stop thinking about the phrase born from that encounter. I found the key where she said it would be. Found the box under the bed, a metal lockbox like you'd keep documents in. Inside was a diary, leather-bound, pages yellowed. My great-great-grandmother's handwriting was harder to read than Grandma's, more formal. I flipped to the last entry, dated October 3, 1937. He was closer tonight, almost to the porch. I could see him clearly in the moonlight. He is impossibly tall and impossibly thin, like something stretched on a rack. His arms hang to his knees. I cannot see his face, only that it is pale and featureless save for two dark hollows where eyes should be. I think he wants inside. I think he has wanted inside since the first night I saw him, but something prevents him. Some boundary he cannot cross unless I invite him. I am leaving tomorrow. I will not invite him. I will not. But I fear it may be too late. I feel different, changed. There is something growing in me that was not there before, something that is not entirely mine. I closed the diary. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. This was insane. This was impossible, but I couldn't deny the thread that connected that entry to me. 4 generations, all women, and according to the dates, none of us should have been possible. My great-grandmother born when her mother was alone. My grandmother born when her mother claimed to have never been with her husband. My mother born when my grandmother was divorced and living alone. And me, born when my mother was single, adamant she'd never been with anyone. I'd always thought she was lying, protecting someone's identity. But what if she hadn't been lying? What if she genuinely didn't know how I'd come to exist? I looked out the window again. The sun was setting, turning the lake orange. And at the tree line right where the forest began, I saw something. A figure, tall and thin, arms hanging low, just standing there, watching. I backed away from the window. My breath was coming fast and shallow. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. But when I looked again, the figure was still there. And it was closer, not by much, maybe 10 feet. But it had moved without me seeing it move. I grabbed my keys, grabbed my bag. I was leaving. I wasn't staying here. Whatever Grandma thought I could do, whatever choice she thought I had, I was making it now. I was leaving. But as I reached the door, something stopped me. A thought, a realization. If I left, would it follow me? Had it followed my great-great-grandmother when she fled? Had it followed all of us, generation after generation, waiting for one of us to finally turn and face it? I looked back at the window. The figure was at the edge of the porch now, right outside, so tall its head extended above the window frame, the dark hollows of its eyes fixed on me, and I understood something then. It wasn't trying to get in, it was waiting to be acknowledged, waiting for one of us to finally see it, fully see it, and not look away. My hand was on the doorknob. I could leave, get in my car, drive back to my life, pretend this never happened, just like my mother did, just like my grandmother did eventually. Or I could turn around, I could walk to that window. I could look at it, really look at it, and finally ask the question that had been echoing through 4 generations of women in my family. What are you, and what do you want? I don't know how long I stood there, caught between the door and the window, between leaving and staying, between fear and curiosity. In the end, I made my choice. I won't tell you which one, because if I chose wrong, I don't want anyone else making the same mistake. And if I chose right, well, I don't want anyone else to have to face what I faced. But I will tell you this, I never went back to the cabin. I sold it within a month, and I never had children. Neither will I. The line ends with me. Whatever was passed down through 4 generations stops here. And some nights when I'm alone in my apartment in Portland, I see it standing in the corner of my room. The thin man, just watching, always watching, but he never comes closer. And I think that's the answer. I think that's what acknowledgement bought me, not freedom, just a permanent witness. A shadow I'll carry until I die. I hope that's enough. I hope it ends with me. Story 9. In the winter of 2017, I agreed to house-sit a cabin for a colleague named Victor while he was out of the country for a month. Victor taught anthropology at the same university where I was finishing my PhD in folklore. He mentioned the cabin before, said it was where he did most of his writing, that the isolation helped him think. When he asked if I'd stay there to keep an eye on the place, I jumped at the opportunity. I was behind on my dissertation and figured a month in the woods with no distractions would help me catch up. The cabin was in Vermont, in the Northeast Kingdom, about an hour from the nearest real town. Victor gave me incredibly detailed instructions, not just how to get there, but how to maintain the place. Keep the fire going constantly. Don't let the pipes freeze. check the generator every 3 days, and one instruction that seemed odd: don't open the door to the root cellar. I keep it locked for a reason. I asked what was down there. He said preservation, old collections from his fieldwork. Some of it might be legally questionable, and he didn't want anyone accidentally disturbing it. Made sense. Anthropologists weren't always scrupulous about how they acquired artifacts, especially decades ago. I drove up in early January. The roads were snow-packed and treacherous. The cabin itself was beautiful, exactly what you'd imagine a professor's writing retreat to look like. Stone foundation, timber frame, a wall of books, a wood stove that radiated heat. The root cellar entrance was in the kitchen floor, a trap door with a heavy padlock. The first week was perfect. I wrote more in those 7 days than I had in the previous 3 months. The silence was absolute. No cars, no voices, no sirens, just wind and the occasional crack of ice in the trees. I'd work all day, cook simple meals, fall asleep reading in front of the fire. The second week, I started noticing the cold. Not outside cold. That was expected, but specific cold. The area around the root cellar door was always 10 degrees colder than the rest of the kitchen. I'd walk past it and feel the temperature drop. Thought maybe there was a draft, but when I checked the seal, it was tight. On day 9, I heard something for the first time. I was upstairs in the loft where Victor had set up a desk, working on a chapter about folklore transmission. Around 3 in the afternoon, I heard a voice from downstairs, a woman's voice, singing. The melody was vaguely familiar, something old, maybe a folk song, but the words weren't English, weren't any language I recognized. I went downstairs, the singing stopped. The cabin was empty. I checked every room, looked outside. No one, but I could still feel the presence of that voice the way a room still feels warm after someone's left. It happened again that night. Same voice, same song. This time I realized it was coming from the kitchen, from the root cellar door. The singing was muffled, like it was coming from deep underground. I stood over the trap door listening. The voice was clear enough that I could tell it wasn't a recording. There were breaths between phrases, slight variations in pitch. Someone was down there. Someone was singing down there. I called Victor on the satellite phone he'd left, got his voicemail, said something about the root cellar. Could he call me back? He didn't, not that day or the next. The singing continued every afternoon and every evening. Always at 3 p.m. and then again at midnight. Always the same song. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on my work, but it was impossible. The voice was too insistent, too real. On day 12, I made a decision I knew was wrong even as I made it. I was going to open the root cellar. Victor had left the key on his key ring, probably by accident. A small brass key that looked antique. I told myself I was just going to look, make sure no one was actually down there. Rule out the impossible. I unlocked the padlock, lifted the trap door. Steep wooden stairs led down into darkness. Cold air flowed up, so cold it burned my lungs. The singing stopped the moment I opened the door, just like it had that first time. I used my phone flashlight. The stairs went down about 12 feet. At the bottom I could see a dirt floor, stone walls, shelves lined with jars and boxes. I went down one step, then another. Told myself I'd just look from the bottom of the stairs. The shelves were full of Victor's collections like he'd said. Pottery shards, textiles, small bones arranged in patterns, and something else. Photographs, black and white prints, dozens of them tacked to the walls. I stepped closer to see them better. They were all of the same woman. Young, maybe 25, long hair, old-fashioned dress, something from the 1950s or 60s. In every photo, she was looking directly at the camera. No smile, no expression, just staring. And in every photo, she was standing in this cabin. Different rooms, different angles, but always this cabin. I recognized the wood stove, the window frames, this exact place. At the back of the cellar was something covered with a tarp. Large, maybe 6 feet long. The shape underneath was wrong, too irregular to be furniture. I didn't want to look under the tarp. Every instinct told me to turn around and go back upstairs, but I looked anyway, lifted the corner of the tarp. It was bones, human bones, arranged in an approximation of a skeleton but not quite right. The proportions were off. The bones had been arranged deliberately, ceremonially. And around the bones, someone had drawn symbols in what looked like ash, circles within circles, lines radiating outward. I dropped the top, backed toward the stairs. That's when the singing started again, right next to me, right in my ear. That woman's voice, so close I could feel breath on my neck. But when I spun around, the cellar was empty. I ran up the stairs, slammed the trap door, locked it. My hands were shaking so badly it took 3 tries to get the padlock on. I grabbed my bag, my laptop, my coat. I was leaving. I didn't care about the dissertation or the promise I'd made to Victor. I was getting out. But when I opened the front door, she was standing there, the woman from the photographs, exactly as she'd looked in those pictures. Same dress, same hair, same expressionless face. She was just standing in the snow 5 feet from the porch, staring at me. I slammed the door, locked it, all the windows, drew all the curtains. She couldn't be real, she couldn't, but I'd seen her, clear as anything I'd ever seen. I called Victor again. This time he answered. I told him everything. The singing, the cellar, the bones, the woman. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You opened it. God, you opened it." I said, "Yes, I opened it. What the hell is down there? Who is that woman?" He said, "Her name was Ellen Kovac. She lived in that cabin in 1962, disappeared that winter. They never found her. I found the bones when I was doing foundation work 15 years ago. I should have reported it. I should have. But I was about to get tenure and I couldn't afford questions about why human remains were on my property. So I kept them. I thought if I honored her somehow, kept her things together, she'd rest." I asked him what that meant. He said, "She doesn't rest. She never has. That's why I locked the cellar. That's why I told you not to open it. As long as it's locked, she stays down there. But if someone opens it, if someone acknowledges her, she comes up. She comes looking." The line went dead. I tried calling back, straight to voicemail. I spent that night huddled in the loft, as far from the trapdoor as I could get. Every window showed her standing outside. Different windows, different angles, but always the same distance away. Never closer, never farther, just standing, waiting. At dawn, I made a run for my car. She didn't try to stop me, just watched as I drove away. I left everything behind except my laptop and my wallet. I never went back. Victor returned from his trip 3 weeks later. I heard he sold the cabin within a month. The new owners reported it to the police. Ellen Kovac's remains were identified, finally given a proper burial. The case was reopened. Victor lost his tenure. But here's the thing I can't stop thinking about. Ellen Kovac disappeared in January 1962. And when they identified her remains, the medical examiner said she'd been dead for approximately 60 years, which meant she'd died around 1962. But Victor said he found the bones 15 years ago in 2002, which meant the bones had been there for 40 years when he found them. So if she died in 1962 and the bones had been underground for 40 years before Victor found them in 2002, where were they for the first 20 years? And if the bones were always in the root cellar, how did people see her standing outside the cabin during those missing decades? Because they did see her. I looked up the history after I left. 3 different renters over the years had reported seeing a woman in an old-fashioned dress standing outside the cabin, watching. So what was I seeing? If Ellen Kovac died in 1962, if her bones were in that cellar the whole time, what exactly was standing outside that cabin watching me? I don't know, but I think Victor was wrong. I don't think she was ever in the cellar. I think the cellar was just where the bones were. And bones are just bones. What I saw, what sang that song, what stood outside in the snow, that wasn't bones. That was something else. Story 10. The last time I went to my family's cabin in the Sawtooth Range of Idaho was in September of 2019. I was 34. The cabin had been in our family since my great-grandfather built it in 1952. My father had brought me there every summer as a kid, taught me to fish in the creek below, taught me to identify animal tracks. He'd died the previous winter, and my brother and I were supposed to clean the place out, decide whether to keep it or sell. My brother couldn't make it. Work conflict. So I drove up alone from Boise, planning to spend 3 days sorting through 70 years of accumulated stuff. The cabin was about 2 hours from the nearest town, up a Forest Service road that washed out every spring and got repaired every summer. The last mile was rough enough that I had to put my truck in 4-wheel drive. When I got there, the cabin looked exactly how I remembered it. Log construction, covered porch, a stone chimney my great-grandfather had built by hand. The door was locked, but I had the key on a ring with about a dozen other keys, half of which I didn't know the purpose of. Inside smelled like must and old wood smoke. I spent the first day just opening things. Drawers, closets, boxes that hadn't been opened in decades. Found old photos of relatives I didn't recognize. Found my grandfather's fishing gear. Found a rifle so old I wasn't sure it was safe to handle. In the back of a closet in the single bedroom, I found something I'd forgotten existed. A wooden box about the size of a shoebox with my name carved into the lid. I'd made this box when I was maybe 10, wood shop project. I'd been so proud of it, I opened it. Inside were things I'd collected that summer. A bird skull, small and delicate, some interesting rocks, a newspaper clipping about a hiker who'd gone missing nearby, and a journal, one of those cheap composition notebooks. I didn't remember keeping a journal. But when I opened it, I recognized my handwriting. The entries were dated July 1995. I'd been here with my father for 3 weeks that summer. I flipped through the pages. Most of the entries were what you'd expect. We caught fish today. We saw a deer. Dad is teaching me to use the axe, but toward the end, the entries changed. July 18th, I saw someone in the woods today, behind the cabin. They were just standing there watching me. When I called to them, they went behind a tree. But when I looked behind the tree, they were gone. July 19th, I told Dad about the person in the woods. He said it was probably a hiker, but looked worried. He told me not to go into the woods alone. I said okay. July 21st. I heard them last night, scratching on the outside of the cabin. Dad heard it too because he got up and looked out the window. He stood there for a long time. When he came back to bed, he said it was nothing, but I could tell he was lying. July 23rd. Dad is acting strange. He keeps checking the windows. He made me promise not to go outside after dark. I asked why, and he said there are animals that come around at night, but I don't think he means regular animals. July 25th. We're leaving early. Dad says he forgot something important back home, but I know that's not true. Last night I woke up and saw him sitting at the table with his rifle. He was just sitting there in the dark, watching the door. I think he's scared. I'm scared too. That was the last entry. I closed the journal, tried to remember that summer. I had vague memories of leaving early, of my father being tense during the drive home, but I'd been 10, I hadn't understood. I went to the window, looked out at the woods behind the cabin. Same trees, same dense forest, 34 years later, but nothing had changed, and I felt something. The same feeling I'd had as a kid, the sensation of being watched. I tried to shake it off. I was an adult now. There was nothing in these woods. Just trees and animals and my own memories making me paranoid. I went back to sorting through the cabin, found more boxes, more forgotten things. As the sun set, I got the generator running, turned on the lights, made myself dinner on the propane stove. Around 9 p.m. I heard it, scratching, exactly like I described in my journal. Slow, deliberate scratches against the outside wall of the cabin. I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. The scratching moved along the wall. I could track its progress by sound. It went from the back of the cabin around to the side, stopped at the window. I didn't want to look, but I looked. There was a hand pressed against the glass, pale, too many fingers, 7 or 8, I couldn't count them properly. They were too long and thin and they bent in too many places. The hand scraped down the glass, leaving streaks, then it was gone. I grabbed my phone, no signal, of course no signal. I grabbed my truck keys, I was leaving, right now. I didn't care what time it was or how dangerous the road was in the dark. But when I opened the door, my truck was different. All 4 tires were flat, not just deflated, shredded, long vertical tears in the rubber like something with claws had systematically destroyed them. I went back inside, locked the door, pushed the heavy table against it, grabbed my father's old rifle. I didn't even know if it worked, if there was ammunition, but it made me feel slightly less helpless. The scratching continued, all around the cabin now. Multiple points, like there was more than one of them. I thought about what I'd written in that journal, about the figure in the woods, about my father's fear. He'd known something. He'd understood something about this place that I'd been too young to grasp. I found more of his things, a trunk under the bed with his name on it. Inside were papers, documents, a folder labeled Property History. I opened it. Inside were newspaper clippings. The first was from 1952, the year my great-grandfather built the cabin. It was about a missing person, a prospector who'd been panning the creek below. He'd disappeared. They'd found his camp intact, his supplies untouched, but he was gone. More clippings. 1956, a family camping nearby. Their daughter, age 8, vanished, never found. 1961, a Forest Service ranger. 1967, 2 hikers. 1973, a surveyor, all in this area. All disappeared without a trace, and under the clippings was a letter, my father's handwriting, addressed to no one, dated August 1995, a month after we'd left early. I don't know what's out there, but I know it's been there since before Dad built the cabin, maybe longer, maybe forever. I saw it clearly that last night, standing at the tree line, tall, wrong, something that should not exist but does. I think Dad knew too. I think that's why he built the cabin where he did. Not in spite of whatever's out there, but because of it, like he was trying to prove something, trying to prove he wasn't afraid. But I am afraid, I'm terrified, and I'm never bringing my son back there, never. Except he had brought me back. We returned to the cabin many times after that. Maybe he'd thought it was safe. Maybe he'd thought whatever he'd seen was gone, or maybe he just hoped I wouldn't see it too. The scratching stopped. For maybe a minute there was complete silence, then I heard something else. Footsteps on the porch, heavy, deliberate. They stopped at the door. The handle turned. The door pushed against the table, once, twice. The table scraped an inch across the floor. I aimed the rifle at the door. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it. The door pushed again. The table moved further. I could see a gap now. And through the gap, something pale, something that didn't look like flesh or fabric, but something between the two. Then my phone rang. Impossible. There was no signal, but it was ringing. I looked at the screen. It said Dad, but my father was dead, had been dead for 9 months. I answered. Silence, then breathing, then my father's voice, but it wasn't right. The words were his, but the voice underneath was wrong, layered, like multiple voices speaking in unison. Leave, the voices said with my father's words. Leave now, don't come back, don't let anyone come back. The line went dead. The pressure against the door stopped. The table settled. Everything went silent. I waited until dawn, sat with that rifle pointed at the door for 8 hours. When first light came, I pushed the table aside, opened the door. The porch was empty, but there were marks, deep gouges in the wood where something had stood. And in the dirt below the porch tracks, they looked almost like footprints, but they had too many toes, and the toes had claws. I walked down to the road, 7 miles, got to a point where my phone had signal, called a tow truck. Cost me $600 to get my truck out and get new tires. Didn't care. I never went back. My brother asked what I decided about the cabin. I told him to sell it. I didn't care what we got for it. Just sell it and never mention it to me again. He said okay. Didn't ask questions. Maybe he heard something in my voice. The cabin sold last spring. Family from out of state bought it as an investment property, planning to fix it up and rent it out. I hope they're careful about who they rent to. I hope they mention the local history. I hope people know what they're getting into, because whatever is out there in those woods, it's patient. It's been there longer than my family, longer than any of us, and I don't think it's going anywhere. Sometimes I think about that phone call, about my father's voice. Was it really him? Was some part of him still there, still trying to protect me even after death? Or was it something else? Something that had learned to mimic him? Something that knew using his voice was the only way to make me listen? I don't know, but I know I'll never go back, and if I ever have kids, I'll make sure they never go there either. Some places aren't meant to be claimed. Some places were never ours to begin with. And some things are best left in the dark, in the deep woods, where they've always been, where they'll always be. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed these stories, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Let me know in the comments which story unsettled you most, and share this with your friends who love a good scare. Until next time, stay safe out there.